speaker, Susan Carlile. I hope you can all hear me. Who will be presenting Spanish modernity in the British press from 1740 to 1760. Just a few seconds to. Yes, Susan.
Great. Hello, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'll get right to it. I have changed my title slightly. It is currently Promoting Spanish Enlightenment Thinking in the British Press, 1740 to 1760. For far too long, scholars understood Spain's reputation in 18th century England as one of backwardness, or at least resistance to Enlightenment thinking. Thankfully, a number of excellent scholars for the past decade, including many attending this conference, Monica Bodufe, Catherine Jaffe, Elizabeth Franklin Lewis, have been writing this reductive narrative by recovering the efforts of the Spanish Enlightenment. And today we've seen much more evidence of this. Today I hope to contribute to this scholarship by providing more evidence for how England benefited from Spanish Enlightenment thinking and encouraged its English readers to resist cultural stereotypes and learn from Spanish thinkers. This talk will consider a translated Spanish essay published in the 2 years leading up to England's declaration of war against Spain in 1762. Also significant is that this first-time translation found its way into the hands of a diverse range of readers through perhaps the most democratic of genres, the periodical essay. I will also show how this essay, likely promoted not by an English-born author, but by an up-and-coming Irish journalist trying to make his way in cosmopolitan London. The essay I will discuss in today's talk is La Defensa de la Mujer, a defense of women. Which was first published in Spain in 1726 by the Benedictine priest Benedito Jerónimo Feijó y Montenegro, and was inserted into the swirl of new London periodical essays, arguments that were bringing more readers into a critique of the mounting imperialist project of English exceptionalism. La Defensa is not only an important contribution to 18th century feminism in its quote, advocacy of women's moral dignity, spiritual equality, and literary enlightenment, to quote Monica Bodufe, but inserted into the increasingly circulated periodical form, it can also be seen through the moment and context in which it was first published in England. From this perspective, A Defense of Women works to remind English citizens of the value of learning from other cultures, rather than from the increasing perspective of trying to dominate them. For the purposes of this initial study, I compared just over 5% of A Defense of Women and determined that it is a close translation of Feijó's original. Clearly, those responsible for bringing Feijó's essay to England were not interested in adjusting his words for understood English taste, as was a common practice in 18th century translation. In this 1760 translation I'm discussing today, Feijó's words and argument are faithfully honored. English readers encountered the first installment of this translation in English, and the official title was A Defense of Women from the Original Spanish of the celebrated Feijó, that's an incorrect writing of it, never attempted in English before. In the first issue of the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion to the Fair Sex. I will continue to repeat this title because there are many ladies' magazines, and it's important to remember that it's from the Polite Companion to the Fair Sex. This was published in January 1716. The first paragraph declares that these installments will provide a defense of women's, quote, capacity for all kinds of sciences and sublime knowledge, against a long-held tradition of deriding women by ancient esteemed writers like Euripides, Aristotle, and Boccaccio. While the essay notes particular male and female qualities, it points to the strength and weaknesses of each, and then proceeds to give biographies of impressive women in history, including Queen Elizabeth of England and Queen Isabel of Spain, as well as an ancient city on the east bank of the Nile in modern-day Sudan, ruled by women, and in modern-day locations such as Borneo, and, quote, the island Formosa situated to the south of China. While it does amplify the strength and intelligence of women from around the world and their equality with men, it is important to recognize what Monica Bodefer observes, the ambiguities and paradoxes in this essay about the nature and depth of the difference between the sexes, as well as Feijoo's sometimes unconscious examples of his resistance to recognizing equality. By today's standards, the argument is too focused on exceptional women. Nor is this a pioneering argument about women's equality. However, what is remarkable is that those responsible for the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion saw their mode of distribution in England as ideal for circulating more progressive ideas, specifically from Spain, more widely than previous feminist texts, and especially one from a country that was in current political conflict with England. In addition to the greater accessibility of this text, a 1760s reader of the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion was encountering other content. A defense of women was placed next to essays that were also interested in women's circumstances, their minds, and their engagement with current military activity involved in British exceptionalism. Many of these essays were either written by or ostensibly to Mrs. Carlile Stanhope, authoritative editorial persona who one reader called an encourager of everything for the good of the public, and in particular the benefit of the ladies. For 13 months, succeeding portions of a defense appeared next to texts like a letter to Mrs. Stanhope on the usual course of young women's education, arguing that 3/4 of our sex are ruined by being taught only French music, dance, and fine works of all kinds, when most should be educated, quote, to enable them to get their own livings, and criticizes those parents who think writing, reading, and such ordinary things will hurt her eyes. Another essay warns against, quote, the encouraging of a spirit of dissatisfaction between kingdoms. They're referring to Scotland, Ireland, and England in this case, whose certain mutual happiness, and will be always in their perfect union. Therefore, we see that the essays that surround a defense of women not only promote women's well-being, but also peace rather than conflict at a political level. Although the fictional Mrs. Carlile Stanhope was the predominant presence in the magazine, another figure, a person who was in these years establishing himself on the London literary scene, must be considered for his potential role in this first English translation of, likely first English translation of the Spanish La Defensa. Rather than Stanhope, Oliver Goldsmith, an active periodicalist from 1759 to 1762, and later the author of Citizen of the World, is the author current scholars associate with the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion. From September 1760, Goldsmith wrote for and at some point may have acted as the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion's editor. Citizen of the World was first published as a series of essays in a rival magazine in 1760-61. Goldsmith was born and raised in Ireland, studying there until his early 20s, when he moved to Edinburgh to study and then traveled to Europe until his late 20s when he settled in London and was soon writing at the Monthly Review. His Irish heritage seems to have given him a sense of himself as a cultural outsider in London. Still, he could please the public while tweaking the sensibilities of those who had rejected him behind a mask of erudition and impartiality. Goldsmith's public spirit was at times imperiled by his own vanity, but his confidence contributed to his periodical ventures. While Goldsmith's contribution to the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion is not clear, his interest in Spain and in the author of La Defensa de la Mujer is worthy of note as we consider how A Defense of Women, the translation, ended up as a central component of the first two volumes of this magazine. The personal and intellectual connections between Ireland and Spain are well documented. Goldsmith recognized these influences when he wrote that the native Irish, quote, are entirely different from those of the English and partake somewhat of modern Spanish customs as described by travelers and historians, acknowledged the natural genius of Spain, and praised the judicious Spaniards for their Spanish dictionary, while criticizing the English for being supinely negligent of their own language. Although Goldsmith too often relied on current stereotypes, he tried to correct some negative ones about Spain by pointing to a past in which Spain had amazed Europe with her wit. He saw Feijóo as carrying on that tradition of genius in the mid-18th century, claimed that Feijóo exposed the, quote, monkish stupidity of our times, looked to him as a kind of spiritual mentor, that is, a voice of reason and morality and learning. He describes Feijóo's an essay on fascination, which was published in the British magazine in 1760, as a study of the evil eye attacking a species of superstition. He wrote an essay in The Bee dedicated to Feijóo, in which he declared the priest an extraordinary genius, explaining that his, quote, studious endeavors seemed calculated to undeceive the superstitious and instruct the ignorant, and that Feijóo unraveled the mysteries of nature and explained physical experiments, and thus was, quote, a debunker of myths. Goldsmith also publicly tried to dissuade his honest friends and brother politicians, as he said, not to declare war against Spain. Considering that the first installment of La Defensa was published in January 1760, that is the translation, A Defense, it may have been intended to draw attention to the enlightened elements in Spain and discourage negative stereotypes. This evidence points to the strong possibility that the Irish-bred Oliver Goldsmith suggested and or supported the publication of A Defense of Women in the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion. And that he was responsible, and that if he was responsible for this first translation into English, he saw Spain as an important intellectual ally. The timing of the distribution of this essay in the Ladies' Magazine or Polite Companion in 1760 also contributes to the possibility that this new translation was part of an effort to discourage British exceptionalism and promote England's greater appreciation for their most southern continental neighbor.